What's the most disturbing thing someone has confessed to you? Story 1. I was guest preaching at a church in East Peoria, Illinois. I had preached here a handful of times before and knew the people somewhat. This Sunday night, there was someone I'd never seen before. He was a young guy in his 20s with long blonde hair. He seemed out of place by his actions. For example, he'd genuflect before he sat down. But this was a Southern Baptist church. But whatever. I was just glad he was there. After the service, one of the deacons stood up and said, "Any announcements for the coming week?" The blonde guy says, "I'd like to talk to Brother Couch Jitsu." This was weird because I had preached probably 15-20 times around the area and nobody had wanted any one-on-one time. But I thought, maybe I said something that resonated with him. We go back into the pastor's office and sit down. I ask him what's up. He says, "Well, I came here tonight to confess." I stopped him there. I said, "This is a Baptist church. I'd be happy to talk to you, but we don't believe or practice confession. I'm not even a pastor. I'm a young guy that's a guest preacher." He said he understood and wanted to continue. As we talked, he told me lots of things, like he was going to become a professional wrestler and other miscellaneous things. He then said, "I need to confess to you that I was in OSF, local hospital, last year." Okay. I was there because I thought I was Jesus Christ. It's okay. I know that I'm not him. Well, that's good. Yeah. I'm one of the final prophets from the book of Revelation. Blank stare. I'm one of them, and my cousin is the other witness. I don't remember much more at that point. It was weird and disturbing. We wrapped up the conversation, and he thanked me for my time. I went out into the sanctuary, grabbed my wife, and we sped down the bluff back to our neighboring town. I kept looking in the rearview mirror as it felt like a bad horror movie. She asked what was wrong. I told her, and she replied, "Oh, he's probably just high." I'm with the dude. That's the intro to a bad horror movie all over the place. I think he was right to speed it out of there. I hoped he warned some of the other pastors before he left. I think that guy is dangerous. I think he's just as dangerous whether he is a last prophet or if he just thinks he's one. Story 2. There was this guy I met on one of those internet chat rooms several years back. Was terribly lonely, and he seemed decent enough, so we met up. He gave off quite a creepy vibe. Not in a way that made me fear for my safety, but it's more like there was something off about him. Didn't think too much about it then, so we went for a drive and had an okay time. Nothing in the least remarkable. We talked over the phone a couple of times in the next 2 weeks. I was teaching preschool then, and he seemed really interested in my work with my kids. None of my friends were interested in what I do at work, so I was initially chuffed at the opportunity to talk about my class. That is, until it started getting a little odd. He began to steer almost every conversation in the direction of my kids. I was getting terribly uncomfortable and stopped talking about them. I guess he started fretting that his source of kitty anecdotes was running dry, so he stopped with the "What did you teach today?" line of questioning and came right out, asking really inappropriate questions about whether the girls in my class sit with their legs closed, and if they don't, what kind of panties they wear. I told him that I wasn't interested in talking to him any longer and that he should perhaps seek help. That's when he told me that he's passionately interested in children and, quote, between 2 and 8 years, and he's especially interested in seeing them in spicy G-strings. I questioned further, and he told me that he got his pictures, videos from IRC, and that once he helped his colleague look after his 5-year-old. Apparently, he blindfolded the kid, felt her up, and stuffed himself into her mouth. He was disgustingly explicit. I called the cops, but sadly nothing much came out of it. I guess he talked his way out. No, that's not a story I was happy to read. How did this guy talk himself out of this? I know this person didn't want anything more to do with this guy, but there should be a little more proactive involvement into this guy being restrained. Why did the cops let this guy go? Where's pre-internet Chris Hansen when you need him? Story 3. My friend was going through a rough time. His mom had just passed, and he was having these weird seizures. He would be unconscious, but conscious in a weird way. He'd black out, but he'd still be able to function, sort of like a zombie, I guess. They were terrifying to witness. Witnessed a lot. Doctors never figured out what was wrong. He confided to me that he was self-unaliving and had made attempts on his life that had either failed or he'd gotten cold feet. For example, downed a load of pills, tried drowning himself, etc. One time it was the end of lunch at school. Yep, we were in year 10, so roughly 15. And I noticed him heading off towards some bushes that were opposite the main school building. Having a bit of a gut lurch, I ran over to him and asked him why he was going the wrong way. He fought with me a bit to just let him skip, but I refused, and being a stubborn person, he knew I wouldn't give up and came with me to class. He told me later that he had a coil of thin blue rope under his jumper and was planning on hanging himself then and there. Can't stand thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't spotted him through the crowds. See, this is what I mean by proactive. This person was able to prevent something very bad happening. I hope he persuaded this person to get help. It doesn't just end with preventing this one incident. If not persuading him, someone has to be told. Someone who can really help. Story 4. I was working in home health and was taking care of a lovely, gracious older woman. We got close. She told me she had married at 13 to a much older man to get away from her family. She had married him one day after meeting him, and I commented that I thought that was a little sudden. She then said she had to. Her father was going to unalive her. 2 nights before, her drunken father and friends were sitting around a bonfire, and her 2-year-old sister wandered around them. They started kicking the child back and forth, joking around, and she fell into the fire and burned to death. This was in a dirt-poor country, and the child probably didn't even have a birth certificate. She said she tried to get the baby out of the fire, but couldn't, and ran away later because they thought she would turn them in. They were going to unalive her. She was in her 80s when she told me this. I know she didn't do anything wrong. She was confessing her guilt about not being able to do anything. The man married her in order to help her get away. They were married for over 60 years until he passed. He worked as some kind of official for the government, and they traveled around the world, had children, and a wonderful life. But she carried that guilt to her grave, even though it wasn't justified. She never went back to visit her family. Story 5. A friend of mine OD'd a few years back on OxyContin. On one drunken night, while reminiscing about him, a mutual friend asked me if I remembered the time that they told me of an accident that the two of them had witnessed where they saw one of the drivers perish. I remembered and asked him why. He then broke down and told me that our dead friend ran to see the man perish and took his wedding ring. He said that the man's body was crushed and couldn't do anything. He could only just look at him as he stole his ring, and that the man looked so scared. My friend said that he didn't know what to do and that it was over so fast that he just ran away with my other friend after it was over. Both of them were severe substance addicts, but I never would have thought that they could be so callous. I considered both of these guys to be like my brothers. I grew up with them and trusted them completely. I will never trust a substance addict again. Story 6. In a drunken confession, an ex told me that he thought he hit and unalived a homeless man on his way home from a party in his early 20s. He said he kept going out of fear because he'd been drinking and didn't want to get into trouble. He told me he even drove straight to a car wash to wash off his truck. He said he never did hear or see anything about it on the news, so he wasn't sure. A former friend of mine confessed that she lied about being violated twice. Once was to get herself out of trouble with her parents, and the second resulted in the guy being kicked out of school and all kinds of other terrible repercussions. She confessed that she did it because she couldn't stand him. He'd been attracted to her for some time, and instead of telling him to just leave her alone, she figured ruining his life would get the job done just fine. These were both disgusting to read. We just don't realize that we are actually connected, whether we want to admit it or not. Unfortunately, our survival instinct allows us to shun everyone around us. The other people in these events had lives. They didn't deserve to be treated this way. I wish those two people accused by the girl get the justice that they rightly deserve. Story 7. I knew this crazy guy in college who claimed he'd unalived a group of people. He claimed that late one night he was driving down the highway and just ran somebody off the road just to see if he could. The car hit a tree at 70 miles per hour and the family of 5 all passed. Usually I'd assumed this guy was full of nonsense, but he did such sociopathic stuff throughout the year, I started to wonder if it was true. Like, he tormented this one girl by telling her she was a nothing person who should commit self-unaliving for so long she actually quit school. And he had a girlfriend fly 1,500 miles to visit, then dumped her when she showed up at the airport and just left her there. Dude wasn't right, so maybe he did it. I don't have proof. Story 8. That they ate cat food as a family. They were creepy customers at CVS that were regulars when I worked there as a teenager. I once asked about their cat to be nice since they were always buying tons of cat food. They answered nonchalantly that they didn't have any cats and they ate the cat food themselves. The son, who was in his mid-20s, referred to himself as absolutely spicy and had t-shirts, hats, etc. with this on it. Spoiler alert. He was not absolutely spicy by any means. Story 9. My best friend was kidnapped, violated, and left in the woods when she was 5. I always knew something bad had happened to her when she was young because of comments made from her family and because of things she freaked out about. After being at her house when her parents were fighting with her grandparents about it, blaming each other like they do often, she took me in the room and told me everything. It was absolutely crazy to hear. And the weird thing is, I had heard stories like, a long time ago a girl was kidnapped around here. Never realized it was the person I spent 90% of my time with. That is so awful. It sounds like she's struggling just to be able to function normally. It seems like she was somewhat able to succeed. She seemed coherent even with their parents and grandparents arguing about her. Story 10. I had a girlfriend back in my first year of college that confessed to me that she had been violated as a little girl by her stepdad. She never really told me specific details because, according to her, it felt like she was asleep when it happened. He knocked her out unconscious, and then she woke up on the floor several feet away from the bed. She got really emotional as she was telling me this, and I hugged her really hard. After that day, she was a different person. Story 11. I met a hobo in Sonora that told me he rolled other hobos off the moving train when they were sleeping to steal their stuff. He told me he was the killer of the train. I don't speak Spanish very well, so we had a translator, and he didn't miss a beat when he was translating it. My heart sank as the words came out of his mouth. It was absolutely surreal. I gave him a couple of cigarettes and got the hell out of there. Story 12. A coworker I barely know approached me one Friday to ask about my weekend plans, then casually told me his wife had unalived herself with a pistol and he was the one that found her. I didn't know what else to say, so I told him my weekend plans, spending time with my wife and newborn son. He got a really odd expression on his face and told me to enjoy it because you never know when it's going to end. I don't know what to make of this guy's reaction. Either he's a sociopath that knew about her condition and knew this was going to happen, or he's just still in shock processing everything. I really hope it's the latter one. And why is he back at work? If he's going around telling everyone point blank about this, if the boss is anything worth his salt, he would tell him to go home and just process this. Your sanity is more important than your job. Story 13. Was playing online NHL or something, and I forgot how it came up, but some kid told me he violated his dog in the butt regularly. The bestiality was disturbing, but I know it's a thing. What was really weird is how normal he thought it was. Like, him and his friends would take turns. And apparently the dog was just used to it and would sit there and enjoy it. I turned my mic off for the rest of the game. Story 14. Worked in a pharmacy. Guy comes in with what looks like healed scars, but these scars cover most of his visible body. He tells me to never sell him Sudafed again. His house blew up and nearly unalived him. Shocked me a bit, but when I told my pharmacist, she just laughed and said he deserved it.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.